Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Take the Meat, Spit Out the Bones, where we talk about education research. Today, we're going to talk about why children aren't reading, right? So, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to also watch a video from the PBIS News Hour on what's caused reading scores to drop to worst point in decades. So, let's
Math and reading scores have dropped to their lowest levels in more than 2 decades among high school seniors. William Brangham reports on new test scores that have many educators and other experts concerned.
That's right, Amna. These scores come from the latest so-called Nations Report Card, which is put out by the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And it shows that student achievement has continued to decline significantly since the pandemic. Among high school seniors, the average reading score last year was the lowest since the assessment began in 1992.
So we haven't really fully examined the impact of COVID. And oftentimes, you tell me about your school district because I know educators do watch this channel. What was the plan to recoup all those years that kids were at home during COVID? Like, what was the plan? Was it move forward with instruction? So, COVID was started when they were in first grade, and then all of a sudden they went back to school in third grade. Did they say, hey, we got to go back to first grade because a lot of these kids missed 1-2 years of instruction? Or they just said, hey, full steam ahead, we're just teaching all third grade and kept it moving? Because I don't think a lot of us went back. I think a lot of us did full steam ahead, and we said, oh, who cares if they learn phonics and phonemic awareness? We're just going to keep it moving, because we don't know the level of instruction that happened during COVID for a lot of students. We don't know if they were actually logged on. A lot of, school districts didn't require videos. So were they even listening? Were they attentive? Were they engaged? Some children actually excelled in COVID, right? They had pods, all that, but there are some real serious, disadvantages that a lot of students faced doing virtual instruction during COVID.
What's worse, nearly a third of seniors did not have the basic reading skills needed to find the details in a given text to understand its meaning. Average math scores also slipped to their lowest levels since 2005. There are many theories about what is going on here. And so to explore some of that, we are joined by Thomas Kane. He's a professor of education at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. Thomas Kane, thank you so much for being here. Somewhat of a broad question for you, but what is your best assessment as to why these scores are so low and continuing to decline?
So first of all, these latest results are not surprising, unfortunately. Our research center has been tracking trends for individual districts around the country for the last 3 or 4 years. What is new is the degree to which these losses are concentrated among the lower achieving students. So the 10th percentile student in the US has lost about 2 grade equivalents since 2015. That's a
So when you think about it, COVID could have done that, right? A lot of people were at home for almost that amount of time, but there are many different things. We're going to go into that, all the different reasons why children are not reading.
large loss, and it'll be equivalent to about 5% of lifetime earnings. So this would have impacts on future income inequality if we don't reverse it.
So can you run us through what the sort of principal theories are as to why we are in the state we're in?
There are 3 hypotheses to explain what's been happening. Number one is there's been a decline in focus on test-based accountability since the No Child Left Behind Act expired in 2015. But the two
There is tons of videos to make on No Child Left Behind because a lot of kids were left behind from that act. But the thing is that there's still hyper testing going on, right? There's actually some people say even more testing going on now than before because everything is technological. Like curriculum companies are tracking kids virtually, tracking them on the iPads. It's everything is everything is downloadable. Like a lot of the assessments students are taking are online. So we have actually a wealth of data oftentimes for kids, right? So some people say it's been an increase of testing, not the reverse.
Two other hypotheses are the rise in social media use, which is concentrated among lower achieving students. By the way, a number of European and Asian countries are seeing the same widening.
Okay, everyone is using social media, not just lower achieving students. Also, too, is it cool to read in America? Is this a culture fostered on reading? So that's something we're gonna have to talk about, because we can't expect the kids to want to read if the adults aren't reading. We're not building a culture around reading, right? Is America an education focused country? I don't know. You tell me in the comments.
That we are. And a third possibility is the rise in student absenteeism, which spiked during the pandemic but remains high.
Definitely. That is a huge issue. Kids don't want to come to school. Or the adults don't want to take the kids to school. I have another video on that, on absenteeism, but there's multi-layers to absenteeism. But are schools fun? Are you treated well at schools, right? Are schools fun? I would love to go to a place that's fun, right? Okay, I'm sure they want to go to Chuck E. Cheese, right? I'm sure they have no problem going there, or an amusement park, right? Are schools fun though? Do we want to go to school? So are schools an inviting place? Are you treated well in these schools? So, I mean, those things too, yes, absenteeism, this could be an adult issue, right? Absenteeism oftentimes is the parent or whoever is raising the child's issue versus a child not wanting to go to school. But then also too, why don't these children want to go to school? Is school a place that's safe? Is school a place that's fun? Is school a place that's creative? They're welcomed, they're loved, they're nurtured, they're cared for.
I want to pick apart a couple of those. One of them in particular, we spoke earlier with a woman named Adiola Whitney. She's the CEO of a group called Reading Partners. And as the name suggests, she points to that being a very critical skill that's at issue here. Let's hear what she had to say.
There's research that shows that in order for kids to be better at reading, they have to practice reading. They need to read more often. But when we look at early grades like K through 2, if a child is already struggling to read, reading more if they're not able to read is a challenge in and of itself. So is there someone at home who can read to them to help build their vocabulary and their comprehension skills?
Do you agree with that assessment that, one, reading is so critical to a student's attainment educationally, but also then how do we address that gap?
So I agree, actually, reading and math has long-term consequences for students' earnings and educational attainment and so forth. And I also agree that early grade reading is critical. But what we're seeing in these numbers is that the problem extends well beyond early grades, that there's been a large decline in 8th grade and in 12th grade reading achievement as well. And so while we work on K to 2, we need approaches to helping the students who are already past grade 2 to recover. If we don't, they will suffer in the long run.
Okay, so actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk more about what I have seen. So I am Take the Meat, Spit Out the Bones, right? I'm your favorite so-called doctor of education. I do have a doctorate in education, and I'm a coach. So I go into a lot of schools where, kids are reading, kids are not reading, kids are, so I am in classrooms almost every single day of the week in different classes, all the way from early childhood to secondary. So this is very important. So let's talk about some of the things I've seen, and we're going to talk more about reading, but this is my list as to why kids are failing in reading. I mentioned COVID, loss of instructional time, Absenteeism is an issue similar to what they said. But reading at home, are we reading at home? Like, so this is going to be a combination of many things, right? So not the most important to the least. So this can be, some researchers may say, hey, them reading at home is not necessarily that as important. That is important as what you do in the classroom. But still, this is a list, not from the most to the least, but many different issues and many different theories that I have come up with. So reading at home, are they doing that? Do you have books at home? Do they visit the library? Do they have a library card? Do kids seek adults reading at home? Are they raised to read? Is there a culture of reading at home? Is there a culture of reading in America? Right? Is it? I mean, do we talk about books constantly, or are we just sharing like social media videos or YouTube videos or TikTok videos? Is it cool to be academically so-called smart in America, right? Is reading cool in America? Do adults read? Oftentimes adults are not reading, which is why the kids aren't reading. They don't, they lead by example. If you're not reading, why do you expect your kids to read, right? Also too as well, is this a reading rich society? People will beg to differ. People are not reading. They're getting their information from social media, video formats. So there's a lack of people, adults reading. And now also what I find in a lot of schools, kids are not really reading like individual books. They're reading from iPads, or they're reading from like a big reader that everyone has to read the same story. They're not like reading their individual books of interest, right? So we haven't honed in on reading for interest, reading for the love of reading, not just reading for, we got to pass this test, right? Are libraries obsolete? Visiting libraries obsolete? Also, the curriculum. We have tons of reading curriculum in this country. Are they effective? Are they culturally relevant? Right? So we have kids reading stories that don't have their racial, cultural, ethnic imagery. There are no, it's not culturally relevant to them as far as comprehension. It's foreign to them. So can we have localized reading curriculum where it's based on the environment that they're living in? If you're living in a farm, why not read a lot of books about farming? That's culturally relevant to you. If you're living in the city, why not read a lot of books and text on city life? Yes, you want to expose children to different forms of reading and, of course, information, but you want to also hone in on their culture, their racial, ethnic background. Also, the books in the library. First off, do you even have books in your classroom, right? So that's another thing. But a lot of kids, especially kids in elementary school, they're reading books that have more imagery or more stories about animals than they would themselves, their racial, ethnic background, right? So that's huge. Like, what are these curriculums that students are learning from? Are they evidence-based? Are they evidence-based for the population that are using them, right? Also, I don't see sustained reading. Kids are not reading a lot in schools, right? So that's a big thing. Every teacher in a school is a reading instructor, right? So some, science teachers are like, oh, I'm just teaching science. No, you're also teaching reading and writing too, right? Like, and you're teaching math, and really, everyone is teaching multi-subject areas, not just the academic subject that you're instructing on, right? So everyone needs to know how to teach reading. There's no sustained reading that I see. Not a lot of kids are reading. And if they're reading, they don't enjoy it. It's not something of interest to them. It's something that's been forced on them. Also, if they don't know how to decode, they talking about after grade two. After grade two, they stopped teaching phonics and phonemic awareness. But if they don't know how to decode multisyllabic words, they don't know the letter sounds. If they don't know how to decode, that's a problem, right? But then who's teaching them this? A lot of folks are passing the buck. Are they teaching them how to decode? Are they teaching them phonics and phonemic awareness? Are they teaching them how to be fluent readers? Right? So that's we're going to talk about it, right? So do they have time to teach reading in schools? That's also, some folks, you don't have time in the day to teach reading. Reading has definitely been prioritized, but are you even listening to kids read too as well? That's the basic way of getting great data on children, listening to them read. How many words per minute are they reading? What are their miscues? Are they comprehending what they're reading, asking them questions about what they're reading? Do they know the words? Do they know the definitions of those words? Do they understand what they're reading? Also, there's a lot of loss of instructional time for various things in schools, where a lot of reading time, we don't have designated or an extended period of reading. Some kids are reading 40 minutes period, 45 minutes a day. But then, when you get to real active reading, it could be 10 minutes of that 45, right? So there's a lot of loss of instructional time for many different aspects of various schools, right? Running records. Are we taking running records of kids? Do we listen to kids read? Is that old school now? Running records, right? Are we using data from children reading to drive instruction? Also, too, let's talk about the feasibility of this too. If you're a teacher of 30 plus kids, right? And then say if you're a secondary teacher in middle or high school, you're seeing 120 kids if you're teaching English, right? Do you have time to listen to everyone read? That's another thing, right? So, class sizes are huge. Yes. In another video, they talked about the 5 key factors of effective schools, but we have to really talk about the feasibility of this, right? Can I really know about the reading behaviors of 120 kids that I'm teaching? That's a lot of kids. Can I really speak to, as a secondary teacher, secondary English teacher, science teacher, whoever, the pitfalls of any child's reading that's in my caseload? That's a lot of kids, right? So that's something too as well. Also, I will blame higher education for this, right? Teachers have to go to school, higher ed institutions, universities, get their grad degree or their bachelor's in education. And some of these programs are not teaching them how to teach reading. Are they taking reading methods courses? Are they being taught how to teach reading? And then also, what is the philosophy from that department, from that school of education, on how to teach reading? Because a lot of people differ on what is a good reading instruction. What are the components of a good reading instruction? People, even the academics, argue about this, which is why we don't have a standardization of how to teach reading in this country, right? So that's a huge issue. Also, too, no shade, no shade, no shade. Secondary educators oftentimes are not taught how to teach reading, just all the components of reading. They're taught maybe vocabulary, comprehension, but oftentimes they're assuming that kids have phonemic awareness, phonics down pat, fluency down pat, and they're not, infusing other elements, the components of reading in their instruction in middle and high school, right? So when I would oftentimes teach, adults, I've taught around 43 undergrad and grad courses in my career. And I would teach a lot of secondary educators who were in-service teachers or pre-service teachers. And oftentimes they did not know how to decode certain words. So basically, I'll put like a list of words up, and oftentimes they didn't know how to decode these words. So let me just show you real quick. So first off, I would tell them all the different reasons why folks use, all the alternatives to scientific evidence in guiding special education practices, especially reading. A lot of teachers use tradition, philosophy, superstition, anecdotes, intuition, all that stuff, right? To make the decisions as to why they should do whatever they should do, right? I'm a primarily a special educator, but of course I've taught gen ed. But when I would teach courses, I would put up words such as this for secondary educators, words such as this, right? And then I would tell them, what are the phonological rules to these words? And they didn't know them, right? So that's important. If you're teaching kids how to read, you have to know the rules of the words. You have to know how to teach them how to decode it, how to decode multisyllabic words, even if you're not teaching them, A, apple, a, or B, bat, b, right? You are still, how to decode abhorrence, right? Or coffle. You know the rules to the words, but you have to, as people who are so-called literate and know how to read, right? So sometimes we forget all those rules. So secondary educators need to be educated on these things. They need to, sit down and study. Because I actually, in my grad degree, I wasn't taught a reading methods course. I had to teach myself how to teach kids how to read. And that's the professional responsibility of all educators. You're all reading teachers, all writing teachers, right? So we have to do the components of reading, phonics and phonemic awareness, fluency, vocab, comprehension. But are the reading materials culturally relevant? Are they critically analyzing the world? Are you using critical literacy, right? Are they examining the world? Are they being critically conscious of the world, asking questions, right? So these are really important issues that we need to think about when teaching reading. So secondary is a big, big, big issue because, after they get out of elementary school, if they didn't grasp those skill sets, how are you picking up from where they left off? Are we just passing the buck? Sometimes no one is going back and say, hey, we're going to have to teach them how to decode multisyllabic words, right? We're going to have to teach them high frequency words. Where's the intervention? Is there intervention in place for struggling readers? Right? So a lot of times secondary, we only focus on vocab, comprehension. And then also teachers are just telling them the words. If they don't know the word, they just tell them the word. They read the word for them, or they have assisted reading. They have they put the reading up on YouTube. They bring up the book and everyone's just listening to them read, listening to someone else read the text. They pick the best reader in the room to read, right? But who is actually teaching these kids how to read apart from comprehension? Comprehension is the ultimate aim of reading, but if they don't know how to decode a word, or they don't know a sound, they don't know a phoneme, they don't know how to use, all these different phonemes to decode a word, then they need to know all the words, you read them fluently in a sentence. So they need to have fluency, oral fluency, silent reading fluency, right? Are we listening to kids read? So those are things that are important when it comes to reading, right? And why kids are failing because of these things, right? Also, a lot of kids are just reading for testing, test prep. They're not reading for interest and enjoyment or to find out information on something they want to learn about, right? They look it up on a video versus find a book to find out the information, right? So that's important because we're kind of traumatizing kids based on over testing them, hyper testing, right? So we want to gain interest, or we want to grow interest in reading in children, not just stigmatize them and bombard them with hyper testing. And you have to read for testing. You got to annotate for testing. Everything is a counterclaim or a claim for testing, right? You want to teach them to read for interest. Also, attention to task has decreased tremendously. They're constantly entertained from media, and books may not be fun for students if it's not taught to be fun, right? Their attention span is very short. Like to sit down and read a 200, 300 page book, in high school, some kids don't have that attention. Also, there's some huge lower expectations from teachers when it comes to readers, like especially struggling readers, especially if you don't have the answers on how to teach these kids how to be better readers. Sometimes you're just like, kids just get passed on by. They get promoted without, knowing how to read. You know how many kids graduate high school not knowing how to read proficiently, right? So also kids need to use their cultural reference in reading, right? Reading texts, like I said, aren't relevant to them, right? They sometimes have a higher likelihood of reading texts that don't have their racial, ethnic background. These are just some reasons, right? So we're going to talk more about reading on this channel, but those are just some of the reasons that I can just come up with right now why kids aren't reading. And we're going to talk about the solutions too as well. But this is huge. Reading is a serious problem. And also too, it's not just pinpointing reading, but you want to build a whole child, right? You want them to be interested, yes, in reading, but you want to develop arts. You want to develop music, movement, right? Kids need not just an overabundance of just reading time, right? Which is great. They need to read more. But if you're only teaching reading, you're only teaching writing, only teaching math, you want to give them a full breadth of education. It's not just the core academic subjects. You want them to be great scientists, great historians, coders, great at different sports, learning instruments, drawing, painting, right? It's not just a hyper focus on one thing, but you want to grow the whole child, because if you grow the whole child, I'm sure they would probably be more interested in reading and learning new things, because that's one facet of how we learn new things, is to read. So hopefully this was informative, and please get down in the comments, let me know what you think. Why are kids not reading proficiently in America? All right, thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.